It's a pleasure and an honor for me that you invited me here. And to all the Erasmus Mundus students in class, I'm sure I am at home. Wherever there is Erasmus and Mundus, I think I am in there as a family member. And so I will be happy to learn from your different perspectives today on children's literature, which for the moment is not one of my main research concerns, but more my creative literary concerns. And I think perhaps in the future, I would be getting into that direction too in terms of research. And like you mentioned, Nina, I come from the Anglophone part of Cameroon. I speak English and French, and I teach the two. And then I have the background that you talked about, but I just wanted to point out that actually there is interesting research going on especially in Norway, at the intersection of children's literature and environmental concerns. So yeah, so if there are students in class who are interested in that domain, afterwards we can be able and willing to help them connect with other researchers who are working on environmental literature, Scandinavian literature, and the environmental humanities. Okay, that being said, let me start sharing my screen with you today for my talk. Just a second, screen share. Just a minute, I think I have to play some technological gymnastics here. Okay, let me come again for the sharing because I think I missed out something. Share screen. Okay, good. I'm going to go now easily. Can we all see my screen?
Yes, it's perfect.
Good. So I am Nsah Mala. That's my name as a writer. And then I was born and given the name Kenneth Nsah. The topic of my discussion today is nighttime storytelling going extinct? A Cameroonian's engagement with children's books. So I want to talk more or less about why I came into children's literature. And I'm framing my discussion around this because this is one of many reasons that actually pushed me into writing children's literature, as I will be discussing later today. But one of the most important factors is that I grew up in this rural community in the Anglophone part of Cameroon, a kingdom which is called Nsah, otherwise called a fondom, because we call our king the Fon, where our mothers and our fathers and even our elder brothers and sisters used to gather around with us, or even our age mates in the evenings when we were cooking, and then we would share stories, we would tell stories, folk tales and other forms of stories. And then today, this kind of tradition is actually dying out. It's actually dying out because the telephone screen has come, the TV screen has come, all these screens have come, and these things are going away, and they have not been recorded because for the most part, it should be noted that Cameroon has over 300 of such kingdoms or ethnic communities. So like in reality, Cameroon is like about 300 nations in one. And a majority of all these ethnic communities, which all have their languages, we speak French and English as official languages, but we have about 300 other languages. And most of these languages have not yet been written down. So they continue to be oral and passed from generation to generation. And when screens and technology and globalization start setting in, the problem now is that some of these cultural artifacts like stories and folktales of our people are beginning to go away with the generations that had them. So this is one of the reasons why I came into this, but I will be coming back to this, yeah, in a while. So let's go to my next slide. Why I became an author of children's books. So the first thing, continuing from where I was discussing from my very big title, is the Nsah factor. Yeah, we spell Nsah with one S and also with two S. So the Nsah factor, first, where is Nsah found? I've told you it is a kingdom of about 25,000 people in the northwest region of Anglophone Cameroon, which is sadly at war at the moment anyway. And it is ruled by a Fon or a king, and also called Nsah Foin. And for more about Nsah, you can read my book, Do You Know Nsah? And then I came into this as a way of documenting and preserving Nsah folktales or Nsah folklore, particularly myths, legends, and the worldview of the people. As the examples, some of my unpublished stories, which Nina has read, like Ewing and Shang, which is my very first children's story I ever wrote. about a mystical spring where we used to fetch water, and there were many stories told to us about that spring and another spring in our locality of Njinangwa, springs where you could go there at night to fetch water, and then the gods will actually whip you with some with some branches of trees, because it's a sacred spring and should not be visited at night. And then stories like Lungai, which Nina has read to, and I will be coming back to that shortly. And then so I started being worried about the disappearing nighttime storytelling tradition in Bursa and beyond, because in most other parts of Cameroon, like I said, and in the majority of sub-Saharan Africa, we have a huge wealth of knowledge in terms of orature, which is actually fast disappearing if something is not done. And I think not only anthropologists have to work on that, but also people in the literary fields like us, as writers, as researchers, have something that we can do about that. And so that's why I came into writing children's literature. And so this is partly related to, for example, my picture book, which is announced for summer this year, What the Moon Cooks. Because what the moon cooks is, the original idea came from a story my mom used to tell me. It was not even actually like a story. I think I've made it now into a story, but it's just that we have this belief, a kind of calendar belief, that the time the moon appears in the sky is determined by what the moon has cooked. Because in our cosmology, the moon, in the Nsah cosmology, the moon is believed to be a living being and even a community of beings. And so it cooks for its children. And so what it cooks determines when it arrives on the sky. But so that's why we will, if it comes early or if it comes later at night or it comes very late, all of those things, they used to tell me. But now I've had to frame that into a story, and we will be knowing about it perhaps more today, perhaps more when the book is published. So the other problem that brought me into children's literature is the problem of a reading culture. In Cameroon, as in much of sub-Saharan Africa, I know that there are notable exceptions like South Africa and some of the Maghreb countries like Morocco, and I think Allah is from Morocco, I guess, yeah. So there are notable exceptions between Northern Africa and South Africa, but in much of sub-Saharan Africa, we have a serious problem of reading. In countries like Cameroon, yeah, Nigeria is becoming a little bit an exception, and also Kenya and Ghana to one extent. But the general thing is that people read only books when they are prescribed on the school book list. So when they graduate out of school, that is all for them. Perhaps because people have more problems to solve, like some people have more pertinent problems, survival problems to solve, maybe to buy food, maybe. But some other people, even when they have the means, they have not cultivated the habit of reading books. And so that's why the book business only really thrives in countries like Cameroon when it is a book published and inscribed on the book list, maybe for primary schools or secondary schools or so on and so forth. So we thought, or I think, like some other people in my category, that we should start solving this problem by grooming a new generation of people who start reading, loving reading from the young ages, so that we can try to push children's books into the hands of children. And not only because those books are prescribed in the nursery schools or in the primary school, but actually to create avenues during which children can read for pleasure, for fun, as my publisher, Cameroonian publisher, did last December, by going to a place which is usually a festive area in Christmas and New Year, where children come and buy balloons and play around. And then they actually took a book stand there to let children know that playing is not only about jumping and skipping, but you can also actually read a book. So that's one of the reasons. Like I've said, a majority of Cameroonians and many Africans don't really read. So this is a serious problem. And so we have to cultivate a reading culture in children. And so prior to even writing my first children's books, I had been doing some videos on Facebook and even my YouTube channel to talk to people, to Cameroonians and other Africans like Nigerians, Kenyans, Congolese, about some free resources online which they can actually use. For example, we have Book Dash, which is an NGO in South Africa that curates books. It gathers people, writers, editors and illustrators who work free of charge on projects, and they deliver books in PDF, which are uploaded to their website in different languages, English and the other South African languages like Afrikaans, and then people can download them, print them, distribute to children, or print and read, or read online. So I used to draw people's attention to this kind of resources, or even the African book storybook, where there are many stories in many indigenous African languages. And then you can sign up there and become either a contributor in writing maybe the stories of your community which are disappearing, or you can join there maybe by reading or downloading and printing and stuff like that. So, and then the third factor why I came into publishing is the diversity factor. Yeah, we all know that there is a serious problem of diversity, especially when it comes to people of color, Black, Asian, and minority ethnic children's books are actually almost nowhere to be found. They have the percentage as compared to books by Western writers from Europe and North America, or with Caucasian characters, and the difference is huge. The difference is quite huge. And so this, I was aware about it too from my personal readings. And I also thought, why not join my own voice in trying to bridge this gap? So because we have not only a limited presence of authors from these backgrounds, but also a limited presence of main characters in books who are from such backgrounds. So I thought that why not bridge the diversity gap by bringing onto the table something from Cameroon, something from Africa, but something from Cameroon, and something from Nsah specifically, because my first nation is Nsah before anything else. So, but I must mention that I'm not the first children's author from Cameroon. Yeah. So Anglophone Cameroon has a few local children's authors. Some of them have been publishing before me. Some of them are joining nearly at the same time like me. So I thought it is important to also mention them, because somebody might be interested in finding out more about them. Yes, of course, apart from Stacy Frohl right here at the bottom, the sad reality is that most of them, you will not find their books online. That's the sad thing for the moment, but at least we should know about Ngo Agnes Nsah, the author of Tales from the Grassland and the Forest. It's actually a compilation of so many folk tales from different parts of Cameroon, the forest part, the grassland part. Well, I think what was forgotten actually there is that Cameroon has like about 3 geographic zones. We have the savannah region, which is more Sahelic in nature, and they also have the grasslands where I come from, and then the forest region towards the Congo Basin. But I think that was the Sahel was missing. But I read these stories. I read these stories when I was in my early classes of secondary school. So it actually formed part of the inspiration for me to be the writer that I am today. So we also have Njimele George Mbona. He is a teacher. He has written a good number of children's books, and he also publishes them locally, but you will not find the books available online. Same too with Esther Tifu Awa. She is a teacher, she's a children's author, and she also has a local publishing house. I will be mentioning some of the publishing houses later on in my talk. And then we have Pochi Tamba, and so she is a journalist, she's a filmmaker, and she has authored some novels for young adults, which have been put onto the book list. Then we have Stacy Frohl, this phenomenal young lady from Cameroon, but she's growing up in South Africa with her parents. She wrote her first children's book before she turned 8. And today she has gone on to become a big public figure in that domain with a Stacy Frohl Foundation that encourages reading and tries to solve other social issues. And she has even delivered a TED talk. Okay. Secondly, in Francophone Cameroon, there are a good number of renowned children writers from Francophone Cameroon, as opposed to Anglophone Cameroon. So the thing is that in Anglophone Cameroon, most of these writers I've told you about are more or less known only within the country, and even by sometimes just a few people. But within Francophone Cameroon, the story is slightly different, because the Francophone part is the majority, and again, many of these authors publish in France. I know it is relatively easier to publish in France than it is easier for an Anglophone to publish in the Anglophone publishing world outside of Africa, whereas most of the times you need to have a literary agent. But in France, for example, you don't necessarily need to have a literary agent before you can land a publishing deal. With this in mind, however, we should know that there are writers like Kidi Bebe. She's a journalist. She is a children's author based in Paris, and she's the daughter of one famous Cameroonian writer called Francis Bebe. Then we have Christian Kinge Epanya. Christian is what I think he is one of the most known children's authors from Cameroon. He's based in France and he has won many literary prizes. He has actually won many literary prizes, including the UNICEF Prize in 1993, and he was nominated last year, 2020, for the Astrid Lindgren Memorial Award in Sweden, what some people call the Nobel Prize for Children's Literature. And then we also have a Nsah and Nsah. Nsah is one of the fastest rising children's authors from Cameroon, from Francophone Cameroon, based in Cameroon. Nearly like every year he signs like 3, 4, 5 contracts with many reputable children's publishers in Paris. And then if not for Corona, he should have been there, because I think prior to Corona, he had been doing book tours in many of the major cities of France in collaboration with his publishers. Then we also have Kwam Tawa. Kwam Tawa is based in Cameroon too, like Alain Sage and Nsah, and all of them, they're from the west region of Cameroon. So they are from a more broadly speaking ethnic community called the Bamileke, but even so in between them, there are some slight differences and variations. So he's a poet, he's an author, and he's also mainly published in France, and he has published in children's literature, but also in adult literature, particularly poetry. Yeah, and then I should add to that, Nsah Alain also runs a publishing house, but so far as I know, he has not yet published any title that is in the children's book category. One of his sensational titles is a book he published, I think, last year or year before last, which is called Di de Botanga, which is about a young girl from the Fulani community or the Fulbe community. A kind of sometimes minority, sometimes majority, depending on how you look at the group, ethnic community in Cameroon and across West Africa and the rest of Africa, which is usually nomadic and the rare cattle. But anyway, they have become more sedentary now because of changes in land tenure and other stuff. So he wrote a book about a young girl from that community, because most of the children in those communities are not allowed to go to school. I mean, like Western education in that kind of sense. So, but this girl has to break the rules and make sure that she goes for her dream until she accomplishes it. So that's one of the top books that he has written. But the other books by him are so good too. So far, they are still in French, as I know. Okay, now I should also mention a few other writers from elsewhere in Africa. I know I cannot pretend to speak for Africa, because Africa is one of the biggest continents on earth, though some people usually conflate it and speak about it as if it was a country. Even the Cameroon where I come from, there is no way I can pretend to speak for all of Cameroon, because as I told you, we're talking here about a country with about 300 ethnic communities in between, which all have their languages, their cultures, and lots of things that are different and specific. And I cannot claim to speak for all of those things. Even if I can try to speak on their behalf, I must always assume and acknowledge my limitations as not coming from there. So now, elsewhere in Africa, I just want to mention a few other names, because I know that not all of us in this program come from Africa, so we might not know. There is Tololwa Mole. He is based in Canada, and he comes from Tanzania. He has also published a lot of children's books. There is Veronique Tajo. She is a well-known novelist and poet, but she also writes and illustrates children's books. She is of Franco-Ivorian origins and currently based in London, but usually moving between London and Cote d'Ivoire. Then there is Tinuke from Nigeria, based in England, and one of her most popular children's book is Baby Goes to Market, which is translated into French as Bébé va au marché. Then there is Lupita Nyong'o, the phenomenal Kenyan Mexican actress who featured in Black Panther, and then later on wrote a children's book about her growing up, and then how people perceived her color and how she herself accepted her color and was proud of her. Then there is Tomi Adeyemi from Nigeria. She's based in the US, and she's an acclaimed young adult author of The Children of Blood and Bone. And this is actually a series. I think the second book of the series should be out by now. She's very, very, very talented and also very, very popular and has made a lot of money in YA, a young adult. Then there is Shadrach Asare. He is a Ghanaian children's author. I'm not very sure if he has published outside of Ghana. I think he has been mostly published by one Ghanaian-based publisher called Sub-Saharan Publishers. But because Sub-Saharan Publishers distributes with African books collectives based in London, his books can easily be bought by any one of us who is outside of Africa. So, and he's one of the acclaimed writers from Ghana. And I should also mention that a few years ago, there was a prize launched in Ghana called the Baobab Literary Prize, and it was encouraging new talent in children's literature. When I started writing children's literature, I had the plans to try to enter for that prize, but suddenly it seems like the prize is not working for the moment. But that's something people might be interested here in checking. Okay. And now let's talk about what I call aporias of children's book publishing in Cameroon and Africa. We can either publish abroad and get very good quality in terms of editorial issues and printing, and have the books available online on Amazon, African Books Collective, and other online sellers. And then we have problems of absence of that book and affordability at home. That because, you know, most African books, whether it is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, whether it is Mbolo Mbowe, I'm talking here about adult literature, but even when it comes to children's literature, it's the same thing. We can easily, or we can publish abroad. The books will be printed in standards that everybody likes in the Western world, but the problem is that even if that book struggles to reach Cameroon, for example, the price will be too high for the average Cameroonian, or it's even difficult to buy from Cameroon or to buy from Amazon and have it shipped. So this is one of the dilemmas that we have as writers and publishers or people who deal with the book industry in Cameroon. So the reverse of this is that you publish at home, then you might sometimes get poor quality, with a few exceptions of new publishers who are becoming a little bit more serious in terms of their editing and other stuff. But otherwise, a majority of the publishers will act like printers. So you publish at home, you have not so good quality in terms of editing and printing, and then you might have no international access. Like the book might not be anywhere to be found online through Amazon and the other major sellers that we know. And so how are people trying to navigate this dilemma? So far now, there are two things people are trying to do. Some people start now by first publishing their books in Africa and then reserving the world rights, and then they later sell the world rights abroad to different parts of the world. That's what like Nobel winner Wole Soyinka just did. He published one of his novels recently in Nigeria, and then he will later on sell the rights globally. Okay, but then also there are people like me and a few other people who would prefer to sell abroad, or if we have the chance to sell abroad, we sell abroad. If we have the chance to publish at home, we publish at home. But when we are selling abroad, we try to see if we can keep the rights for Africa. For example, with regard to my children's book, What the Moon Cooks, which is forthcoming, I made sure that I reserve the rights for Africa because I know it will be difficult for people to buy it in most African countries. And even when they do, it will be very expensive. So I prefer to, later on in time, see what I can do to negotiate a different contract for publishing it in Cameroon and maybe other African countries. So I think, and we actually need to encourage reading and also to develop a robust local publishing industry, and which is actually lacking for the most part in most sub-Saharan African countries. So like I was saying, to continue with this now, where can you publish children's book in Cameroon? In Cameroon, you can publish children's books. Well, it's pretty difficult to have them published because many of the publishing houses that exist, like I said, many of them are actually printers. Like they will not do any thorough editing, or even when they edit, it will be more about some kind of proofreading. You will hardly see a publisher who actually turns your manuscript heads on and say you have to rewrite this chapter or you have to rewrite this. No, like those exist, but in a very limited degree. So another problem is that most of the publishers who claim to be there, especially in Francophone Cameroon, are what we call vanity publishers. Publishers who tell you that they are publishing or counter the l'auteur, which actually means you are paying to get published. So that's one thing we need to know. So some people don't have the money to do that, or some people like me, I find that very absurd to pay to publish. I would prefer to do self-publishing than to do that. Just 1 minute, please. Just 1 minute. I'll be back. Just give me a minute. I have to attend to some noise. Oh, I think the noise has ceased. Okay. So let's continue. Like I said, so that's one of the things. And so some people now prefer to do self-publishing. And again, we don't have good experts who can guide people in the process of doing self-publishing. So that's another huge problem. Good. But that being said, some children's publishers in Cameroon worth noting, and the most important of them for me, and I think for most Cameroonians, is Edition Akomamba. Edition Akomamba, who published my Andolo, the talented albino, Andolo, l'albinos talentueux, is the longest existing and lone specialized publisher of children's books in Cameroon, children's illustrated books and comics. The company was set up so many years ago, I think in collaboration with, I think, a Dutch expert in children's books, and then later on it went into a hiatus, but later on it resumed its activities and one business person bought over it, and I think the man is doing pretty well now with the publishing house. I think for now it is the reference when it comes to children's books publishing in Cameroon in terms of quality of printing, editing, and marketing. I think there is no match so far. And then one good thing is that they have carved out their niche. They don't venture into adult publishing at all. They make sure they're only with children's books, and they they give almost no attention to running after books getting into the book list, because the majority of publishers in the country will try to get their books into the book list at all cost, because that's where you make the money. But these guys are trying to show that it's possible to also make some little money or some money, even if you don't get your book into the book list. Okay, and then there is now a Zebra Comics. It is an emerging specialized publisher of comics. So I don't want to say a lot about them, but I think they are doing pretty good in their domain, and let's just hope and pray that they continue and that they grow into something bigger than what exists at the moment. But they are good, so good now. Then there is Edition Adinkra. It is also an emerging publisher founded by a young lady, Ahmed Tuku, and it's specializing only in digital children's books. Yeah, so, but I'm still to see, because I think they're still to launch. They're still gathering. They want to, I think she said they wanted to gather so many titles. I can't remember how many as a minimum before the launch. So we'll see how it goes when it is launched. Then there is Cowrie Books by Esther Awatifu, whom I mentioned earlier. And it's also an emerging publisher for children and adults book. But for now, I think most of the titles there have been books by Tifu herself. Yeah. That's all I can say. And then in terms of some NGOs that are promoting reading in Cameroon, we can mention, for example, Harambe Africa. You can find this on Facebook, for example, or Booktik by MCN. I think I sent you one of my interviews with them. And then Muna Kalati, which is promoting reading and video gaming in Africa. They also interviewed me recently. And I think the founder and CEO of Muna Kalati, Christian Elonge, got nominated into, I think, a literacy, I think the International Literacy Association or Federation nominated him as one of the 30 or 40 young people who are doing great work to promote literacy and reading around the world this year, early this year. Okay, so some general educational publishers in Cameroon who sometimes will publish 1 or 2 titles for children in passing, or maybe publish them for the book list, but they are worth being mentioned here. Like Edition Clay, which is one of the oldest publishers in Cameroon, is I think it is owned by the Presbyterian Missionary, or it has affiliations with them, and it's one of the longest serving publishers in Cameroon. It actually published Tales from the Grasslands and the Forest. So it also publishes a good number of collections of tales and folk tales and legends and myths from different communities of Cameroon. Then we have Cosmos Educational Press, which publishes books mainly for primary and secondary education. We have NMI Education, which is a partner to Cambridge University Press, and it publishes books for primary and secondary education. Then we have Asva Education, which publishes books for primary and secondary education. Then we have Nsah Publishers, which publishes literary and general interest titles, and also for schools. Then we have Edition Afrique, which publishes literary and general interest titles and for schools. Then we have Edition La Proximité, publishing literary and general interest titles. And then we have Spears Books and Langa, Research and Publishing Common Initiative Group, which are Cameroon registered or Cameroon oriented, but actually operated largely from outside. For example, Langa is registered in Bamenda, the capital, the headquarters of the Northwest region where I come from, but it operates mainly from abroad because the founder is based in South Africa and many of the people on the editorial board are scattered around different parts of the world. Then Spears Books, all these publishers have published some of my poetry and other books, like Spears Books published this book for me, Little Gabriel Starts to Read, which is the English version of Le Petit Gabriel Commence à Lire, that was published in France, this small one here. So yeah, Spears is based in, I think, Colorado in the US, but very Cameroonian oriented because the founder and publisher, Jude Fokwang, is from Cameroon, and the majority of the titles on their catalog are from Cameroon in different categories, adult literature, and then just building this children's catalog now, but mostly adult literature and research publications. And then I could also add Bakwa Books, which is an emerging specialized literary publisher, and they're doing exceedingly well because I think they are aiming for international standards in terms of editing. So they don't want to be just another Cameroonian publisher that sells like a printer, but they are actually based in Cameroon and operated by Njekasu McViban, and they are extremely professional. And most of the books that are published in Cameroon also have editions, US editions, because I think they have a partner publisher in the US. And Njekasu is an editor and a writer with a lot of experience in that domain, and he really wants to get serious and quality literature out there. But so far, no children's book from them, as far as I know. Okay, now I'm driving towards the end of my talk, but one of the things is like turning the oral culture of Nsah, maybe Cameroon, but with reservations, into picture books on a national and international market. What are some of the challenges? First, it's very challenging to turn Nsah folklore into picture books for Western markets. And why? Because this is a problem, like turning it into books for Cameroon is pretty much like easier or not a hard nut to crack. But the problem with the Western market is, one, Euro-American children's books and Nsah books or Nsah folktales largely share different story traditions. There is this huge difference in story traditions. An example is Euro-American audiences or publishers will mostly expect a book to have a certain standard story arc of maybe rising action, initiation, rising action, climax and falling action and resolution and stuff like that. Or somebody will ask you, what are the obstacles, what are the challenges? But we don't usually frame stories in Africa from this kind of perspective. So this is a huge difference, okay? Now, then there is also like challenges of brevity versus detail. Because we know there is this thing in Europe and North America, perhaps maybe in Asia, I don't know, but I think I know about it in Europe and in North America, I mean in continental Europe or Western Europe, where there is a tendency now to move towards very short text, and sometimes even like wordless picture books, because people think that children's attention span is reducing as they are competing between books and screens and stuff like that. And this is not yet actually the problem for countries like Cameroon and Africa, where the reading rates are still low. And many people in the rural communities don't have a lot of access maybe to the screens that are competing, or video games and things like that. But now, like a story that I could write and publish in Cameroon with 1,000 words or 1,500 words, in the Western world, the writer, the publishers or the agents or the editors will tell you have to cut it down to 500. You have to cut it. Like most publishers actually tell you that the maximum number of words they accept is this. And usually it turns around 500 or 600 or below for most children's books, especially in the fiction category. Sometimes they expand the gap to about 1,000 words if it is non-fiction. And so these are huge challenges for someone who is trying to navigate the market from two perspectives, like myself. Okay, and then also the problems I already mentioned earlier, like problems of affordability. when the book is published, finally published, maybe in the Western world, or if it is published in Africa and it's difficult to buy by calling the publisher on the phone or talking with them privately on Facebook before they can ever ship the book to you. And yeah, all of these difficulties are there. And then there is also the problem of the Euro-American gatekeeping tradition in publishing, where you have to have an agent for the most part if you want to be published by the big five or maybe the big four. Yeah. And we know even people in Europe and in North America find it pretty difficult to land agents. Then what more of us coming from Africa and who are maybe sometimes still struggling with trying to fit into the standard Western story arc and stuff like that. So you understand that the challenges are even again enormous for people from backgrounds like mine. Next slide. So there are also limited possibilities to publish at home, as I already said earlier, and having the books available abroad at the same time, or perhaps publishing abroad and not having them at home. And then also there is, for my personal case, divided attention between creative writing, academic research, and many other commitments in terms of youth leadership, in terms of developmental associations that are trying to raise funds for development projects, like building a bridge in my community, and lots and lots and lots of stuff like that. Yeah. Okay, so a list of my published children's books. Ndolo the Talented Albino, 2020, published in English and French by Édition Akomamba. The French version is Ndolo l'Albinos Talentueux. Then we have Little Gabriel Starts to Read. The English version is published by Spears Books, which I showed you, this one. Now we have hardback. So it was initially in paperback, but now we have a hardback because some of my friends who are librarians online told me that they couldn't order it for the libraries because the libraries have a strict policy on buying only hardback. So now we have the book available in hardback. So we also have the French version, which is Le Petit Gabriel commence à lire. And then this exciting forthcoming title of mine, What the Moon Cooks, that is forthcoming from Power Kid Books in the US. So my final words, I look forward to your questions, suggestions, comments, remarks, and any possible contributions towards growing the children's book sector in Cameroon and Africa. So permit me to thank you in some of the languages that I speak, starting from Besa and Yonga Kena in English, thank you in French, merci in Danish, which I'm still struggling to let tak. I am Nsah Mala.
Thank you very much, Nsah. Yes, comments are starting to get in, from everybody. Thank you very much. I think you made an excellent introduction to a country that we know so little about, and it's very, I have many questions and comments myself, but I would prefer that the students ask the questions they might have. We will postpone the break a bit and take a bit of my class afterwards, so that there will be time for questions now. Thoughts or comments?
Can I please ask a question?
Can somebody volunteer to read the comments for us, or some of the comments that are questions, or do we take questions in the form of direct somebody coming on as who is Wafa has done?
Wafa,
yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for your talk. It was very insightful to understand. I really like this idea of reviving the folklores, especially the culture where it is more like reading out of like what is prescribed rather than, self-motivated. But I understand the social and economical factors which influence that habit as well. My question is, especially when authors or illustrators are going for the choice of self-publishing because of the challenges which you shared. And publishing houses, because have more team, like from editing to marketing, like there are people who do work for them. Do you think like self-publishing, it's like more like a assumption that they are not capable of doing that? Or do you think that in reality the challenge exists, that they cannot reach out to the people to sell their books, or the quality of these books can be affected?
Okay, yes, of course, sometimes the quality of the books is affected. But sometimes it is not, because some of the people who self-publish in the Western world, like here in Europe or in America, are actually people who pay professional editors to edit their books before the books go online. That's one factor. Then another perspective for me would not be to think that going the self-publishing way is saying that, or is assuming that the professionals are not efficient or capable, but I think it is rather escaping the obstacles and blockages that come with gatekeeping. Because, you know, most of the publishing houses, I know, like, I'm lucky to have landed a book deal without having an agent. But if I tell you that I have a spreadsheet where I have over 200 or maybe getting to that number of submissions to different kind of publishers. So you need to be like, you need to have the patience that I do have to be able to submit here and there and get the rejections and keep going. Okay. So for some people, they don't have the patience to do that kind of thing I've done. And so they just prefer, like, they just get annoyed, because sometimes you find people who have written excellent books, people who write far more above what I can do, who get rejected, not perhaps because they really have to be rejected, but because of the editorial policy of the publishing house. Sometimes the publishing house is even kind enough, or like not even kind, like they say, humble enough to tell you that, like, this book is super awesome, but it's just that it doesn't fit into our policy or catalog at the moment, because sometimes they have published similar books in the past, and then they are trying to move into one direction. So generally, the problem for me, I think, is that because of this gatekeeping thing of either you first have to have an agent, and then even the agent brings a lot of stuff that they want you to change in your story, and then eventually, even when the book is sold out, the editor in the publishing house also has to maybe sometimes ask for a lot of changes in the story. Some people are not patient to do that, or don't even just want to do that, so they will prefer to have their story as authentic as they want it, perhaps, and they have some editor that they pay. You know, like a paid editor will not be as commanding on your manuscript as the editor of a house that has acquired your book. So I think a lot of stuff go into it when people are making the choice to go that way. And just to finish on this point, also note that there are many people who have gone the self-publishing way, and then later on the big publishers are running after them. Like, there are people who have gone and they have self-published, and then their book begins to like, it is ranked like a bestseller in Amazon, and then New York Times starts featuring it, and then it is actually the big publisher that start emailing them and asking them, do you have a manuscript for us? And then at that time, they don't even need to have an agent and things like that. Yeah, but that's a very rare feat to achieve. It's a very rare and difficult feat to achieve, but a few people have done that.
Thank you.
Welcome.
More questions or comments or thoughts?
I'd like to say something.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your talk. I thought it was really insightful that you said that the storytelling is different in Africa or in Cameroon, because when I was reading your picture book, and I was wondering, is there going to be a challenge about Andolo? Is he going to face some challenge? And then now it makes much more sense that it's just a different way of telling the story. Yeah. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. And then let me just take up from your comment and comment on something that Ala said earlier today in the morning before my talk. I think she was talking about another difference between stories from different parts of the world, especially Africa and the Western world, where when it comes to a topic like death, that seems to be too much of a sensitive topic for children's books in Europe and in America. But for us, that is no problem at all, because death is a very normalized part of society. I know, ever since I came to Denmark, now getting to 3 years, I've never seen a cask, I've never seen a coffin being driven maybe to a cemetery or anything. But if you go to Cameroon, I don't think you can spend one full day in Cameroon without seeing either a banner announcing a funeral here or there, or a burial ceremony, or maybe seeing a vehicle taking a corpse to a mortuary, or taking it from the mortuary to a cemetery where it will be buried. So that is a very normal thing. And sometimes children go with their moms or with their dads to burials and stuff like that. So we will easily talk about a topic like that in our children's books, but that would be like, oh, this is so sensitive. The kids will not take this here. Okay, yeah. So thank you for that remark you made in the body, Ella, and thank you too for this remark you've made that now you understand the context and you see the differences between Andolo, Talented Albino, where it comes from, and then why it is different from the children's books you read before. Thank you. Thank you. Feel free. Is there any other question you have? Feel free.
Yeah, oh, sorry.
Okay.
Okay, I've got a question. You mentioned that when you're publishing outside of Africa, your stories have to be cut short, whereas in Africa, I think it's about 2,000 words.
Like most publishing houses don't actually tell you about their word limit. For example, my publisher in Cameroon, so far I've not heard them say anything about their word limit. But other publishers here in Europe, in the UK, here in continental Europe, and in America and Canada are sometimes very strict and upfront on the maximum number of words they are accepting for a manuscript in let's say picture book, for example.
I was just wondering whether there might sometimes then the message or some of the content that you wanted in your storyline or in your book to be spread, whether that might be lost when you have to cut down.
Sure. Sometimes you actually lose some parts of your story that you hold so dear to your heart, and that perhaps some other readers could eventually also hold them dear to their hearts, but you may have to cut them out in order to comply with that kind of editorial demand. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I ask something?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I would like to ask, actually, maybe it's also related with our course, that how children have been seen in children's books in Cameroon. Of course, like I'm sure that there should be like diversity a lot, but in my context in Turkey, for example, when I was a child, it was more like stereotypical children's are represented in stereotypical ways. But now it started to like grow much more like children who has agency and can take their decisions and so on. So do you see any kind of like differences in children's books in Cameroon, for example?
Okay, good question. I think so far, well, without any quantitative study I've done on this, but I think from my experience of the books I've read, that the majority of books have a fundamental inspiration from folklore, most of them, but not all. But the great majority have this kind of inspiration from folklore, and in folklore, children are hardly represented as stereotypes. Because most of the folkloric stories about children or even animals, remember we're talking here about people who are very spiritual. Many Africans are highly spiritual, and that's why, like, we will consider even a rock as a living thing. We will consider a stream as a living thing, and so then what more of a human child? So, like, the children in most of the stories are actually rounded characters and heroic characters, and not lopsided or maybe flat characters or stereotypes for the most part. That's what I think. Does that answer you?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome.
Comment? Yes.
Yeah, I have. Sorry.
Tell me. You go first.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I have a question. At the beginning, you mentioned very limited comments about the relationship between children's literature and the ecological environment.
Okay.
Well, this means the children's literature has a very practical meaning to the society. So I'm curious about this aspect, this meaning. So could you give me some recommend to think more about this topic?
Okay, yeah, feel free to, if you like, I can give you my email here in the chat box, and then feel free to email me afterwards, and I can send you some references and some people you can contact who are specialists in that area.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm typing it here, but in case you miss it out, you can ask from Nina, and she will be happy to help you with my email. But here it is. So feel free to send me an email and say you are from this class, and that you were interested in children's literature and ecological issues, and then we'll pick it up from there. And
Nsah, can I ask you what you're thinking of the book by Nina Goga, Eco-Critical Perspectives on Children's Text and Cultures?
Yes, that's one of the books.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I took one PhD course where she was a teacher there.
Yes.
Yeah, and they have many other similar books or articles. So you can, yeah.
On the course plan, I put Nina Goga's book on as a suggestion for the last class, but we can discuss that whether this is what you want to add to our course towards the end. But we will. But it sounds as if you're interested in that. But I'm interrupting somebody who also wanted to ask you a final question, perhaps. Please.
Hello.
Yes, Vito.
So you might notice that a lot of us has the same name, Vito.
Okay.
No, my actual name is Gilang.
Okay.
Thank you for the presentation. It was very, very interesting. I love the fact that you mentioned about reviving oral stories and the fact that they're dying and then that there's a movement in reviving them. I was wondering if there is a movement in trying to reimagine them, and what other challenges are there? Any cultural gatekeepers, cultural or religious gatekeepers that have been keeping such attempts from getting to the market? Because in the context of my country, Indonesia, publishing children's stories and actually getting them to the market depends a lot on these gatekeepers, and most of them are government-based.
Okay, could you just repeat the part of your question before you mentioned Indonesia, your home country, because I think there was a connection problem. I didn't hear it well.
The question is there any gatekeepers, as in people in authority that have made it like difficult for people to publish reimagined oral stories, reimagined like local stories?
Okay. No, I don't think they are. I think on the contrary, there is indirect or subtle encouragement for people to reinvent those stories, or at least to document them, even in their raw form. I think institutional censorship happens in countries like Cameroon and other countries in sub-Saharan Africa, or any countries where we have a dictatorial regime or a regime that is long-serving. But that concerns when you're writing things that sound too political. But when it comes to children's books and folk tales and myths and legends that apparently seem not to be very political in nature, I think the powers that be will not mind a lot if you are writing those or publishing those. I think the main thing is that we have fewer people who really want to write or who are writers. And then again, we also have very limited possibilities of getting what you have written published, because publishing houses are few. And then sometimes they ask people to pay to get published, but not all of them do that anyway. I must repeat this point. Yeah. So I think there is less gatekeeping when it comes to the documentation or the transformation and the modification of the people's orature into written literature. On the contrary, I think that even the state government departments, like in the Ministry of Arts and Culture and other departments, actually encourage that kind of activity.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So there are questions. There are questions in the chat box from Allah. Yes, I think there are 2 or 3. Can you read them out and maybe we answer those and then you continue from there, please?
Allah asks, would you also argue that saving the oral history is more important than writing modern stories?
And then, okay, and then she also asked a question about the ability of curing sick, playing music and making beautiful. Is it like giving magical powers to the protagonist? Are you talking about Andolo, the talented Abino there?
Yes, I'm talking about him. Like when I was reading the story, I was feeling that a lot of the magical power, I would argue that they are magical powers, can be related to the idea of the magical themes in the oral history that you talked about, but also it can be argued on the other like the other opposites. Like you can argue that because he is different, he has all of these magical power, which, and I'm borrowing here from the disability studies, a term called the super crib, which means that the different person will get this magical power just because he is different.
Okay.
So I'm trying to balance those. Finally, another question. Sorry, bear with me with all the questions.
Ala, would you please let Nsah answer the first question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, for the first question, thank you, Ala. I'm interested to hear you say this. The writer writes the book and then the readers read the book. So the readers bring the interpretation or they bring their own meaning onto the book. Like actually, I never intended those metaphors and allusions to maybe curing the sick and the playing of music to be magical. But a reader, a scholar is free to interpret it the way they want, as long as they can back that up with the text. But on the contrary, there is another book I'm planning also on albinism, based mainly on my uncle, who is mentioned in this book that we read. And that one is going to be super magical because he actually had a lot of magical powers because he was a traditional healer. He was a traditional doctor. And that one is going to be explicitly magical in so many ways. But I did not intend that Andolo would be magical. But again, I must mention that even when I'm trying to highlight the magical powers of my uncle, as I think I may be doing, my late extended uncle. At one point, I have to also be careful because there are these stereotypes about albinos or people with albinism in many parts of Africa, especially in East or Southeastern Africa, where there are a lot of ritual killings of people with albinism because they think they have some of this stereotypical and unfounded beliefs that body parts of people with albinism have powers, and so I have to be careful in order not to maybe continue to promote that kind of culture about it. So I think it's going to be very difficult for me the way I would write that book to promote what my uncle was actually doing in a place that accepted him and never discriminated against him based on his color. And he is not doing those things because he is albino. There are other people who are not albinos and who had similar powers. So yeah, that's that for the thing about magic.